So thanks everyone for coming, a fabulous turnout. And thank you for people who are online. So I'm really pleased to introduce Associate Professor Cara Beal. And we met years ago with the previous head of, I shouldn't have said that because I don't know the title. But anyway, the person before Ruben Bolt, and he introduced us.
Oh, Adrian Miller.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Cara did some fantastic work on values around water, just out of the goodness of her heart, with a project that Miriam and I were working on. So we stayed in contact, and with the Darwin Harbour integrated reporting, when it got funded by the Ian Potter Foundation, it was a fantastic opportunity to work with Cara, who's substantively from Griffith University and Queensland, and she's been here for several months where we're working on the next iteration, we hope. And Cara's title is Associate Professor and wears many hats, an environmental scientist with an environmental health background. And thank you very much for talking with us.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you. That's a good introduction, so I don't have to talk too much. So as Karen said, I'm a visiting scholar from Griffith University in sunny Queensland, apparently, but apparently it's been raining for about 22 days in a row in May, which is super rare. So, and of course, Queenslanders tend to whinge about the weather if it's below 23 degrees and above 27 degrees. So there's been lots of whinging, and I'm very glad I'm up here in this climate. I love it. And I'm leaving in about 3 weeks and I'll be very sad. So yes.
Sorry.
That's all right.
This likes to be clicked on before it works. Okay, try now.
Okay. Actually, before this photo was taken, I've been lucky enough to stay in Wagga Beach across the peninsula, and this is one of the many beautiful sunsets, and there's beautiful sunrises, and I just every single sunrise and sunset is illegally beautiful. So I just wanted to show that. Before I go much further, I did want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I've been doing the work up here in Darwin, the Larrakia people, and extend my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm also conscious I've been doing a lot of work that I will be presenting a little bit more work later around in Brisbane with the Yagara, the Turrbal and the Ugambe people of the Gold Coast. So I'm clicking this, am I, Robin?
Arrow's probably better.
Arrow's better. So today, I'll just kind of give you a bit of background as to who is talking at you for the next 40 minutes. And then we'll go into the Darwin Harbour integrated report card that Karen introduced, that we've been working on together, and looking at how we might extend that through to 2020 and beyond with any hope. And then I'll be talking a bit about what I've been doing, which is generally around water or poo or wee or any of the above, which we all kind of do and drink, and well, hopefully just the water, but I'll relate a little bit to some of those projects as well. So a bit of background. Unlike a lot of academics, I'm a bit awkward about talking about myself, so I'll do it very quickly. So I did a background in Bachelor of Environmental Studies, Bachelor of Science at Griffith University back before it was the internet. I think in my honours year, we learnt about this www thing, the World Wide Web, and yeah, so that was back in the early 90s. Then I sold my soul as an environmental consultant for a few years, both in the UK, New South Wales, Queensland, but that was really good. I learnt to be very creative in my timekeeping, because you've got to account to every 15-minute block of work. So that was a good background for that. Then I leapt into my PhD, which I fondly call my PhD, because I spent an extraordinary amount of time in with my head in a septic tank, and learnt all about water and the amazing qualities of soil and how that can treat and clean water and wastewater. So I have very fond memories of my PhD. Then I joined the folds of government, which again was a good insight into how many forms you needed to sign just to get a pen. And then we were lucky, we could do a bit of wacky science back at the Department of Environment and Resource Management in Queensland. It was right near the Millennium Drought. I was right on top of that. So unusually for government, we could do a bit of wacky science. So we could look at urine diversion toilets, which then I've since doing some more research on, which I'll talk about, looking at different alternative ways of using wastewater and recycled water and indirect potable reuse and all those sorts of things, which were really exciting at the time. And then it rained and all our contracts didn't get extended and wacky science went out the door. But that was good. That was good background for me as well. And then I've been a bit of a pracademic at Griffith Uni since about 2009. And I say pracademic, I'm half on soft money, so I have to do the research that speaks to industry partners where they need applied research that actually has to have some kind of application on the ground, or else they won't give you the money, as we all know. So I'm very transdisciplinary, hard to put in a box. Environmental engineering and big data and data science really excites me as well. Data, you can't manage what you can't measure, those sorts of things I really like, but also environmental health, water, sanitation, hygiene, wee, poo, etc. But working with people. I've gone from physical into much more of the social sciences and working with people. I find that very interesting. Much harder though, because they tend to answer back and have opinions, which is a little annoying, but it's actually very good for us researchers to listen. So this, towards the integrated reporting for Darwin Harbour. So this is a project Karen gave you a bit of background on. It is something I was involved with a little bit later, not actually right at the start, but the team, the main team was Karen, Simon, Bill Dennison from the United States. Julia is a Northern Territory government worker. Lorraine Williams is a wonderful Larrakia researcher that some of you may know, and that dodgy person on the far right. And lots of partners, really good partners. It was initiated by the Darwin Harbour Advisory Committee and supported by the Ian Potter Foundation and the Northern Territory government and a number of stakeholders. You can't do a report card without a bunch of different stakeholders and partners. Darwin Harbour report cards are not unfamiliar in Darwin. They have been around for a while. I know you can look them up on the website and get some old iterations of report cards. What the team wanted to do a bit more differently with this one is to truly try and make it integrated, to truly try and look at the social and environmental and cultural aspects of reporting. So not just your water quality, not just how many dolphins are out there or how many jobs can the harbour support, but what are the values and the indicators that can inform those values for everyone that uses the harbour. And of course, the Larrakia people and other Aboriginal groups on the other side, such as the Belluin community and others, very much needed to be part of this story and very much needed to be included, not just consulting, but really part of developing the report card. And that was where I'm a non-Indigenous person, but that's where I came in as an area of interest and a little bit of background working with Lorraine Williams and others. So this new vision, as Simon Costanzo loves to talk about, who is the project manager for this, was looking at how we can integrate all of these socio-cultural and other aspects into the report card. This on the right is just, as probably can't see it very well there, but and I wasn't familiar to start with, working around the Darwin Harbour, how big the catchment is and how many different creeks and tributaries and communities that it includes. So it's pretty exciting stuff. So you can't read all of that. That's just lots of colour to show that we were doing some work. And we managed to we identified about 12 values by talking with other stakeholders and workshops and different communities and people around the Darwin Harbour. So it's very important with report cards. I wasn't too familiar with working on them, but it didn't surprise me, and it pleased me about how much we really talk to our stakeholders and our partners about it, and not just coming up with data and ideas and values without good consultation and discussion. So we came up with 12 values: clean water, healthy ecosystems and landscapes, biodiversity, Indigenous values, management, jobs, lifestyle and recreation, Port of Darwin, sustainability, tourism, multiculturalism and resilience, and climate change. Some of those have changed a little bit. Some of them may not be in future iterations, but this is all part of a report card, particularly the first one. It's just to get a feel for what's out there, what data is there. Does it talk to the harbour and the values and the people? And then we can kind of just massage it as we go. So those were the 12 values, and within each of those values need to be some indicators. So it's all very well coming up with values, but how do we measure them? How do we give a scorecard? What's some important factors that we might want to look at? And so the indicators ranged, I won't read them all out, but they ranged from hard sciencey ones for water quality and sediment quality to more qualitative kind of values or indicators for visitors and multicultural objectives, spiritual and sacred sites, etc. So it was really quite tricky to try and come up with standardised scores to be able to then, I guess the importance of a report card is there's iterations over the years, so we need to make sure that any of that data or any of those scoring values can be accessed through over the years and can be measured from the previous year, so you can start to get a benchmark of what's happening. And that's not always easy with Indigenous metrics, for example. So this will be, as it should be, an ongoing kind of organic process to try and get it not so much right, but try and get it sort of socially and culturally acceptable and a good reflection of Indigenous values. It's not an easy thing. So how we did the report card scoring is, I thought it was a bit of kind of magic where you put a witch's hat on and do some things and all these values come out, but it's actually quite tricky. You need to make sure you're standardised. But you need to keep it fairly simple as well, because you can't always get the best data and you're not always working with people who may be particularly good at the data or understand the analysis. So we kind of scored on a gradient of unhealthy to healthy conditions. Healthy gets greener, unhealthy gets kind of redder or more orange, and it's based on a percentage or a proportion of measurements that might meet that threshold. As I said, it's hard to get information into a quantifiable score for those sociocultural aspects, but we kind of did it. And we'll continue to do it. And we checked in with our Indigenous researchers as well. And it's not perfect, but we'll get there. I think as long as you acknowledge that it's not perfect and you try to get better, then I think that's okay. So we've got a website, and then there's videos, and we've got a few of the report cards from last year that you can have. Help yourself to them. So B- for the first one, 2021, it was a B-, and that's not awful, that's not terrible, that's pretty good. Water quality was pretty good. Management, lifestyle and recreation, unsurprisingly, all scored very highly. In the areas, bearing in mind we were in the COVID, right in the middle of the COVID situation, pandemic. Tourism and sustainability is probably not so much the COVID. We're probably having a look at the indicators used to drive that, but tourism was quite low. Indigenous values scored highly in some indicators and not so well in others. And that's an area I'll just give you a few extra slides around, because that's my area of interest. So a B-. So not too bad, kicking it off for a start. So we had a wonderful opening and unveiling, didn't we, Karen? Unveiling of the scorecard, and we had some good government folks turn up and some really good interest in a bit of media. So that was fantastic. That was all quite positive. We've just got to try and keep that momentum rolling now, which is always quite hard to do sometimes. So these are, apologies for the slight busyness of the slides. As much as I try, I always kind of fail sometimes with that. But these are the Indigenous values, and just talking you through the methods here. So we did some online surveys, in-person surveys, and some key informant interviews. So there was lots of talking, or I like to think lots of listening, more importantly, and a mixture of surveys are really, I mean, they serve a purpose, but they're not always the best way of getting information, particularly from certain groups. Maybe certainly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups are not necessarily, it's not necessarily their favoured way of giving information out. But we managed to have some online surveys, some in-person, some just general talking. So we tried to mix it up a bit. From a range of different locations around the Darwin Harbour. Bellew, Palmerston, 15 Mile, Minmarama, the Bagot community, and various other places. So that was quite good. We got a good representation across people with secondary, tertiary, postgraduate education, different income ranges, different locations, and so on. Quite a large number of women compared to men, though, which is often, I'm not quite sure why, but that's often the case in these sorts of surveys. So we looked at 3 values. We looked at Indigenous food security, we looked at spiritual and sacred sites, and we looked at other cultural values, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So in terms of Indigenous food security, there's lots of yellow here in terms of the score, which isn't great. It's about a C. And one of the drivers there, and I probably can't read here, is that in terms of, say, seafood, about almost 70% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that there's less seafood in the harbour now than there was in the past. Now, in the past could have been a year or 2 ago, or it could have been a generation ago. It was fairly kind of flexible there, but very overwhelmingly clear that food just isn't there to be harvested, just the biodiversity of it as well as the abundance of it. And in terms of mainland foods, again, an overwhelming majority said, look, there's just less food there at different times of the year. We've noticed it, our elders have noticed it. So there's definitely some stories to be told there. And there was quite a lot of insight as to why these might be lower levels of food, of mainland and seafoods as well. So development, lots of activity on the harbour, habitat loss, cane toads, frequent and hot fires, and so on. So a range of different reasons there. Future generations. So we were really wanting to know, do you feel that the cultural knowledge of your mobs or your communities are being passed down effectively? Do you think that they're respected by non-Indigenous people? And do you think that that your opinions and your Indigenous cultural values and knowledge are sought and used appropriately by non-Indigenous people and organisations, and indeed by Indigenous organisations? And again, we actually got lots of green here, which is positive. And we know that we had quite a good cross section of representation, so we can say fairly confidently that in terms of cultural discussion, respect of knowledge within the communities, and maybe not quite so much, but still fairly positive two-way consultation with other non-Indigenous groups as well. So it was quite positive. There are certainly, in what I'm looking at now, is ways to improve on that and ways to really try and get that two-way communication between Indigenous and non-Indigenous organisations. But yeah, it wasn't too bad. It got a B. Again, we could argue how we can compare that over the years, and that's something that we'll look into. The third one we looked at was spiritual and sacred sites, and that was an interesting one. We may not actually have that as an indicator or as a value this time around. It was quite tricky for a number of reasons. It's quite, in the end, speaking with Lorraine Williams, maybe not the most appropriate value for the harbour for a few reasons, but certainly when we looked at it last year, there was a belief that generally non-Indigenous people and organisations didn't tend to respect or know or care about. This was from the Indigenous perspective, from the spiritual and sacred sites. They also felt that a lot of their young folks in their communities weren't that aware of the sacred sites either, or maybe didn't respect them as much. So that there was some interesting results there. So just finishing up now on that, for the 2022 report card, I'm working with the Larrakia Rangers and and some of the Belluin community and other Larrakia people to see how we can extract some of the Indigenous ecological knowledge or ecosystems knowledge and embed that and kind of underpin some of the indicators, particularly the biodiversity data as well. So we've got a bunch of that we're looking into seeing how that might help to contribute to our knowledge of the biodiversity values, which were quite low, or they were greyed out in terms of we didn't quite have the data for that. Engaging with those groups and understanding the most appropriate next steps for improving the values and indicators. So now that we've done that first step in understanding a baseline of where the Larrakia and other Aboriginal groups groups are situated in terms of the questions we asked about cultural values and food insecurity and so on. The next step is, well, what are we going to do with that data? We're not going to just keep collecting it and asking the same questions over and over again, because that's too frequently occurring and doesn't really help. And we don't really, it's not really kind of building trust or relationships or really pushing the boundaries of ignorance out. We need to really get a feel for how we can improve on that. We're also seeking further funding to support the 2022 and beyond card. So that's something that we're continuing to work toward as well. So that's the Darwin Harbour integrated report card. Do we have questions at the end, or should we have some now? Because I'm going to leap into something completely different. But we can have questions later if there are any. I am mindful that I'm standing between you and Friday afternoon drinks. So it's a tough gig, you guys, honestly. But I'm pretty impressed at how many of you have come. So I will talk about water wee and poo, just because why not on a Friday afternoon, really? So some of my research at Griffith, I've been involved in, and I thought I had more, but there's two. If you wanted, you can take these reports away. I tend to tart out my glossies to people, anyone who will read them. But this summarises the work that I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years in around 6 or 7 Indigenous communities. One of them's in Northern Territory in Ali Kurung, a few are in Torres Strait Island Regional Council, and a couple in Cape York, 2 or 3 in Cape York, where we wanted to understand residential water end use, characterise how the water's used, why it's being used, and how we might get some appropriate messaging out to communities, because you typically quite high water use, but to really understand why that water is high and how does that impact on public health and environmental health and wellbeing, and how we can improve on that, improve the water security. So we installed smart meters, we installed energy meters, we installed hot water meters. So we metered and wired about 4 or 5 communities for sound. In many of there was quite a high level of participation as well. And the great thing about these smaller remote communities is that you only need maybe around 10 to 15 homes, and you've got about 20 to 30% of the samples. So we like to think it was reasonably representative. And we did workshops and barbecues, and that was weird, automatically. Workshops, barbecues, all sorts of things around community engagement. And in terms of the quantifiable outcomes, in general, working with communities, knowing how much water they're using, giving them the feedback, talking to them about culturally appropriate ways of reducing water use saved. We found about 130 litres per person per day on average. So that's quite significant. And a lot of the councils were really excited about that. It does help when you're monitoring the water and measuring it, but even more so, it helps to give that feedback to people. We all like feedback. We all need to know how we're using our water and how the neighbours using it, and how did they use less and maybe we should use less type thing. Lots of cost savings. We found related energy savings. So some really good numbers there that councils and water and energy utilities were really excited about. But what I was really excited about is that some of the communities, as a result of the kind of work we did, the Torres Strait Island Regional Council got about quite a few $1 million worth of funding to then put these smart meters across all of the Torres Straits, and they've found a couple of the communities there, as a result of being able to detect leaks and manage their water, now have access to 24/7 water, whereas before they didn't. So we've had stories of TOs in tears saying, traditional owners in tears saying, for the first time in my generation, we've got water on that tap for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's not just because of a piece of technology. It's talking to people and communicating with people and using the data from that technology in a really good way. Drinking water management. The other thing we found out about that is that there's a lot of money and effort being put into having high quality drinking water in a lot of the communities up in, well, in the Torres Straits, but other Indigenous communities as well, but that's not necessarily being drunk. So people will prefer to drink rainwater. It's more natural, it tastes better, it doesn't have chemicals in it. It's not as trusted, it's more trusted than this very expensive mains water. So that's, again, another community engagement and education kind of point of pressure point there. Yeah, treated town water is not always seen as a trusted or safe source. We don't drink that water, they put chemicals in it. I mean, those chemicals tend to make the water safe, which is, for example, Queensland Health's objective. But if people aren't drinking or trusting that water, then you've got a big disjunct that you really need to deal with and talk about and engage with. That's boring. This one here, again, one of the questions was, how useful did you find actions that you used during your community water demand management trial? And I really wanted to just show that, so the green and the blue mean they found it useful. And so individual feedback and benchmarking with others, the community participants found that that sort of information that smart meters can get you were really, really useful in order to think about how water is being used and change water use practices. So they're kind of just some of the key points that we've found from there. So moving on to who's used a urine diversion toilet before? Who would like to? Yeah, there you go, Penny, on ya. There's one just out the back waiting. No, there isn't. So this is... So who's heard of urine diversion toilets? Who's heard of using urine as a liquid fertiliser? Yeah. Okay, all right, cool. Phew. I was about to run away with grief there. Gosh, how do I explain this in 10 minutes? Yes, so it's something we've been doing for about 5,000 years, just quietly, but it's becoming more and more seen at, well, in the Nature paper, there was an article out in February about, it was entitled How Reusing Your Pee Will Save the World, which is rather grandiose, and there's quite, no pressure, that's fine. But for a science and nature kind of paper to have that, I think people are realising that it's pretty interesting, it's got a lot of value, and it's not just a bit of a joke anymore, so I should stop making jokes about it. So we won an ARC Industrial Transformation Research Hub, we being not me or Griffith Uni, we are part of a team, but the University of Technology Sydney won the research hub. Lots and lots of strong industry involvement, and really how it's used is you collect the urine here, and the urine itself, so you can get a range of different toilets. The poo and the paper and the other water goes off to sewer as normal, and the wee is collected, and it's really, really highly rich in nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, NPK, which of course any gardeners amongst you know that is the ingredients of fertiliser, and around about the same concentrations as well. So we're just kind of walking fertilisers. And it's and if anyone's had particularly a son, you know that they don't mind peeing on trees from a very, very young age. So they're good nutrient recyclers. But nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, getting that can be very expensive or resource intensive. We reached phosphorus peak years ago, so that whatever phosphorus we had 10 years ago, we have much, much less of it now. It's really expensive to extract nitrogen. Yet we make all of those ourselves every single day and flush it down the toilet. So the idea is to recycle that, capture it, store it and treat it, and then reuse it, really close that nutrient loop. So there's a bunch of different industry partners that are involved in that. And we'll be doing some trials in Queensland, in some parklands, looking at different ways, different types of crops that might respond and so on. So lots of agricultural trials. So Griffith University, there's this great big, you need a good kind of picture or scheme or flow chart when you go for a huge grant. So this one was it. We're involved in the user acceptability, user preferences. Will people use toilets? Will they not use toilets? Is it even going to work? And what might people prefer? For example, when I did some work back in 2007 on urine separation toilets in Currumbin Eco Village, I asked the guys, would you sit down to pee? Because it's a much cheaper toilet to export from Germany, and I'm hoping you're going to say yes. And they went, no. So we had to make sure. And That's okay. I don't think I'd stand up to pee, so I kind of get it. So we had to think about that, and we had to consider user preferences as well. And regulators, and we've had some really good early success in talking to the regulators, that they're actually really keen on this idea, and we're working now with them to mainstream and change some of the legislation that will allow this to happen, which I think is terrific. It'll be a long road, but that'll be great. Also, we're looking at the whole of system economics. Does it even stack up as a business case? Carrying urine as a liquid is not necessarily a great, can be quite expensive as soon as you're starting to transport liquid, because it's very heavy and you can't go very far without that life cycle cost starting to blow out. And also looking at the safety and the process and the end products and health-based risk assessment. So that'll be pretty exciting and interesting stuff. And there's a few, some media have had some great fun and done lots of puns and taking the piss out of the whole thing. I just did, yes. With quite a few media articles and stuff. So if you're interested, if you just type in pee and parklands and you'll see what you get. So the very last one is putting poo into the mix, water, sanitation, hygiene. So WASH, which is a really close area to my heart, particularly in low socioeconomic communities or countries. So this had a very grandiose title. We were looking to progress inclusive, resilient and sustainable development goals and WASH outcomes in the rural Pacific through developing approaches to enable effective community-based water management. Whew, it was a busy 3 years. We're just wrapping it up now, and the idea was really, so has anyone been to the Pacific? Yep. Do you, in the rural areas? Or a while ago, yeah. So how water is managed and waste and toilets, and how sanitation and water is managed in rural Pacific areas is that there's a water committee or a WASH committee. I mean, they may or may not have any experience in toilets or in drinking water or purifying water, but they're the committee, and they just have to let it go and just keep happening. They just have to manage this water and wastewater within the communities. So they really are up to themselves in how to do that, and so they rely a lot on the community themselves, as it's a necessary model of I guess, because they're so isolated and remote, and the governments they're not quite the same as they are here. So I guess it's a necessary model of management, but it's not necessarily a great model of management. And what we wanted to look at was to really just see how we can have that plus. So it's called community water management, but that plus is about, well, how can external actors help? How can we bring in different ways of engaging sort of strength-based qualities and experience within community or within towns close to community, or how these external actors can kind of help a little bit more, not just money and not just kind of project-based funding. So again, it was quite aspirational. There were 2 phases to it. First phase was to look at 8 different communities in 2 different countries and find out what the water is like, what the sanitation is like there. And then the second phase was to come up with some tools and trial them and evaluate. And that, yes, we looked at the Solomon Islands and Fiji. Again, we did lots of water quality testing. We did lots of key informant interviews and a range of different, well, we've collected so much data. I've just been looking at it now over the last couple of days, and it's doing my head in. Lots and lots and lots and lots of data. So now we're trying to be useful with that data and see if we can come up with some useful tools. This is about the second to last slide. You've done very well, people. So tools, we came up with a few different tools. We found that the idea of water as everyone's business was really, really important, particularly for community engagement. And education and awareness. Everyone in the community, it's important for everyone to include it as part of their businesses. Everyone's got some sort of a responsibility to look after their water. The technical backstopping is an idea where other external agents can come in regularly and just check out and see if there's how people are going, and just sort of that ongoing maintenance that they currently don't have. And then other ideas of community-led safety plans and strong WASH committees. So there were some tools that we came up with. So that's really the very last slide, is that Penny and myself are supervisors, along with Mel Jackson from Griffith Uni, for Cynthia Coyne, who some of you may know. She's got about 1 million degrees and has just completed a master's here at CDU, and is also a researcher with Karen as well. So we're doing a PhD, which is looking at a PhD around energy and microgrids in renewable microgrids in communities in Western Australia. So thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about myself and my work and my research, but also the work we've been doing for the Darwin Harbour Integrated Report Card's been great. Thanks to Real for hosting me for the last 4 months, and Karen for making a lot of this happen. Really appreciate it. And of course, Red 1, Level 3, who've given me a seat and have been putting up with me. And Robin, you're ready to kick me out. So thanks, guys. Cheers.
Yeah. Do you have any questions?
It's too much there to talk about. Yeah. Oh, I did want to say that I've got a few. Anyway, I've got still doing car shop now. I did part of the work I did. We co-wrote a children's book on water efficiency from like a Torres Strait Island perspective. So I've just got a few of those if you've got kids, or if you wanted to have a look at them or take them away with you. So that's, yeah, so just a few little show bag goodies there.
It's not a put up job, but I know we've sort of talked about it with the report cards. One thing that I'm really interested in is that we had a value for biodiversity, and then we have a value for Indigenous cultural values, and the two are really intersecting. So do you see there's a case for maybe merging them?
Yeah, I do. Yep. I don't think you can have one without the other for the Darwin Harbour. Yeah, I do. How we do it is going to have to take a bit of thought, but I don't think you can have one without the other and truly put our hand on our hearts and say it's an integrated report card without including those, that Indigenous knowledge, but also the actual data that the Larrakia Rangers have been collecting as well. Thanks for that, Dorothy Dixer.
I was going to put maybe even a counter view, maybe, I don't know, it's a counter view, because you're certainly right, you need to include Indigenous values, but that doesn't mean that biodiversity values and Indigenous cultural values are the same, because there are many aspects of biodiversity that are not related to Indigenous cultural values.
Yes, so there would be a few indicators within the biodiversity value.
Yeah, that would be separate, and so I mean, I'd be arguing you would separate them.
Yep.
One thing I was interested though, particularly, is that you had some Indigenous values to do with the land rather than just the water, and so I was just wondering how you're defining, how far out of the water are you defining the harbour?
Yep.
When you
that's a good question. I don't exactly know the answer so much as the reason why we did include those mainland ones was that they're often pretty close anyway to the coast, and the people who are living on the harbour or right next to the harbour are still accessing that area that's I guess being fed by the harbour itself. So I don't exactly know. I mean, Karen, you might know, but there's not actually a specific
because it was obviously beyond the mangroves, for example, because if you're talking about fire and cane toads and things.
Yeah. And I guess any area that's draining into that catchment too, which would be part of that group system.
Because it came up many times, and to be honest with you, we really struggled for data that's collected annually. And so the catchment disturbance index was another example of where we used annually collected data from the catchment to inform another value, which is called healthy ecosystems and landscapes. So we explained a little bit in there, but in the website, that we have gone into the catchment. And a lot of that's necessity. And there was the social media good abuse about the shortcomings of the card from the Environment Centre. And I thought that was fantastic because it meant that people were noticing and that we'd fallen short, but just because there's lack of data. So it was really an interesting response.
Yeah, it was good. It was good that people had thought about that and responded. And as you said, it was kind of good, bad responding. Yeah.
I have heard of limestone, crushed limestone being used to collect urea from urine, but it would, on thinking about it, would actually capture phosphate as well.
Yes, it might actually. Would it? I don't know if it would absorb. Would it absorb it effectively?
Just because it's alkaline, it will
Yeah.
phosphate, but of course it may not be excreted as a phosphate.
No, I don't think it is.
In
I think
water, it's a polyphosphate,
yeah.
which wouldn't be collected.
Interesting.
Do you have a chemist on the team?
We do. We do. Yes. University of Southern Queensland. Yeah. So that's that. There. My understanding is that that technical chemical side is reasonably well understood, clearly not by me, but is quite sophisticated. They've been doing it in Sweden and Northern Europe for about 20 years, 20 or 30 years. But that's a good point. There would definitely, yeah, there would be that those sorts of issues are going to be looked at as well. The chemical safety as well as the microbiological safety too. Hi.
Sorry. Thank you, and sorry I was 10 minutes late because you might have said something right at the beginning that I missed.
Thank you for coming.
I'm just really aware of the amount of proposals that are coming up for industries on, is it Middle Arm or anyway, on the harbour, that will involve chemicals, etc. And I was just wondering whether there's been some discussion that this is actually setting a baseline and that in the future, the information that's been collected now will be even more useful because if things start to change. Is that part of the...
Yeah. We've certainly had some collaboration and meetings with the Middle Arm precinct project people, and they are very, very interested and keen in what we're doing and see exactly that there's value here, that we're presenting baselines and then we're doing some ongoing monitoring as well. That keenness we're hoping might translate into some support as well. We're working on that, but they do see the value of that and we're certainly talking with them. Yeah, good point.
You want to...
Just a question about the relative success of a B- score. Just off the top of your head, so if Darwin Harbour's B-,
yes,
what would say Sydney Harbour be? What would Port Phillip Bay be? Or
yeah, I don't know. I genuinely don't know how Darwin Harbour would compare. My gut feel is I think it's quite good comparison.
Many ways it's difficult,
but I don't have any basis for that.
Yeah, and all the cultural indices.
Yes, whether you're comparing apples with apples is a different thing. That's right. Yeah.
But presumably, at least the biophysical side is compared to Sydney, Sydney is much better. I presume. Is that
I would
right?
suspect so. As I say, I don't know, but I don't think Sydney's doing particularly well. Do you know, Karen?
Yeah, there's a World Harbour group out of Sydney Institute of Marine Science, and we're just waiting for it to come out. But there's a global measure, comparative measure of the water quality in harbours, and we got included. So Darwin's in there, and I saw the raw data, and we just look brilliant. But that's just a couple of metrics around microbes and pathogens. So there are other attributes, but right now we look super. But then we've got Hong Kong and other harbours in there. So.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
follow-up question, have those measures changed since we've got, X and these developments on that?
I guess
Do you know?
we took those samples around the same time over 3 years. And we're also looking at antibiotic resistance genes, which might not be very interesting. It's where people are taking a lot of antibiotics, and there's a correlation between the health of the community and these resistance genes, and also people are non-compliant. And so we've included an Indigenous only community as well as Darwin. So we don't know those results.
Interesting. It's scary even.
But none of it's annual. It's one-off huge grant.
Penny.
Cara is, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So Cara, just the regulatory sort of role for the score. So, if you get B1, is there any, or sorry, not B, a minus B, or C or D, is there some, does that trigger some regulatory action, or is it really a sort of social based impetus and a tool for people to use and then complain or be concerned? So,
well, again, I actually don't know in Darwin or in the Northern Territory whether it is or not. I know in Queensland it can be. I mean, not official regulatory. You'd like to think it would be, and I suspect and I hope it is maybe an unofficial trigger, but certainly for the social and the community engagement side. But Karen, I'm glad you're in the audience today.
I mean, it's just a fantastic question.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the whole Ian Potter grant justification was, if we don't know, we're just, as a community, we're completely ignorant. And so in the first instance, being that we're just starting, if we just have a voice and we have a mechanism, later on maybe, but we just want to, even government's a bit, we're interested, we're not, so it's a bit, so it's early days.
That's interesting because it's,
that's just giving something that the community actually can measure and know about is a powerful thing, even if that's the end of it. But if it then was linked through to regulatory settings that could be triggered, or that public could complain, or something, that would be fantastic. So no, it's great.
Very good questions. Good answers, Karen.
Oh yeah, thanks again for coming.
Oh, thank you.